A new study on greenhouse gas intensity of production from the oil sands is out today by IHS MarkIt. And we're going to be talking to Kevin Birn, who heads up their oil sands dialogue for IHS MarkIt, and is one of my favorite economists around the oil sands. I've interviewed him many times over the years. So welcome to the interview, Kevin.
Thank you, Markham.
Now, I know you've done, you came out with a study a couple of years ago that was very, very comprehensive and very, very technical, as I recall our previous interviews. This is an update? And if it is, I mean, could you give us an overview, please?
Yeah, it's essentially, it's a little bit more than an update. So the last study you mentioned was in 2018, and it looked at the historical trend from about 2008, 2009 to 2017. And then we projected forward based on existing commercially available technology and some, kind of borderline commercial technology to 2030 to see what the trajectory could be. This study uses the same tools and models we built back then to basically do a reassessment of the period 2008, 2009 to 2018, because we now had a full additional calendar year of data available to us. And 2018 was interesting as well, because that was the year of the oversupply in Western Canada and the deep price collapse and some of the curtailments as well, where production had to be pushed below what was probably optimal. And so we included that in there. This doesn't include the same projection. That's a second order level of work and effort, but we wanted to try to see what was going on. And then we also have a full decade as well at this point in time in terms of the data set that we need to do these facility bottoms up kind of estimations.
So the conclusions that I saw in the study show that emissions have gone down about, if I remember correctly, 25 or 30% over the last decade. Will be a full 30% by 2030, yeah. Again, if I'm remembering correctly. And so what's responsible for that?
Well, so we found, the results are similar to the last study. And that should be comforting since we're using similar tools. We also updated a number of our inputs. So we had more precision around the intensity of the cogeneration use and some of the power generation. And we had some modeling, discovered some interesting modeling features around doing individual facilities versus averages as well. So we had to correct for that. So overall, I think the 20% reduction is consistent with what we saw last time. And it is, our expectations are much aligned with because the baseline is similar to what we saw last time, our expectations for 2030 are similar as well, I think, at this point.
Right. One of the things that really stood out for me in this study is the last study showed that the boundaries of the emissions were 37 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per barrel at the bottom end and 127 kilograms at the top end. But this time it's 40, not much change, but at the top it's 201. Why the discrepancy?
Well, we're modeling every facility in the oil sands, each individual, and there's lots of them. And each one is going to operate in their own conditions in the environment they find in. And in 2018 versus 2017, we had a few facilities in ramp up in 2017. And in 2018, it's safe to say that they're probably no longer in ramp up. And so we included them in the study, and they were basically running it's coming from the thermal side, high amounts of steam per barrel produced. And so we should expect that the upper bound should move around year to year. This is not where producers want to be, because the reality is a high emission portfolio comes from the fact that you're probably burning a lot of hydrocarbons per unit of output. So it's not the most efficient place to be either. And so we'd expect facilities to figure this out, and they should drop down towards the mean over time. Or the other thing is likely as well, they're probably indicative of high cost, and it's probably not sustainable in this price environment as well.
Now, let's talk about the 100 megaton emissions cap that was brought in under the Climate Leadership Plan under the Notley government in 2015. It's the Kenney government kept it. And I understand that you have a section in your study that discusses that.
That's correct. I think, just to back up one step before we talk about that, I think around emissions, there's often confusion around why one number looks the way, or why can two smart people have different numbers and disagree. And I think a lot of this goes to, when it comes to emission accounting, there are different definitions of which emissions you include or consider, because people are trying to answer different questions. So when we look at our intensity numbers versus national inventory, they're going to be different. national inventory report from Environment and Climate Change Canada looks at the emissions directly a result of the facilities. So the combustion of emissions on site are included, nothing beyond that. Whereas our study considers the upstream implications of some of their activities as well. So we include upstream emissions associated with the production of the condensate used in the oil sands, the intensity of that. We look at the upstream emissions associated with the natural gas. We also then include and balance against the energy trade. If they export to the grid, they get that deducted against them. If they import, it gets added in. So we're using what we consider a wider boundary, a wider set of emissions, and that doesn't affect the results and the interpretation of the results. The 100 megaton cap is similar. There is a different definition provided to it under what emissions are counted. And this has been, I think this has been a source of confusion over the last couple of years, which is why we included it and we wanted to clearly spell it out. Under the 100 megaton cap, electrical generation use isn't included. New, quote unquote, new upgrading, so upgrading after a specific point in time is not included. So as to not disincentivize value-added investments. And primary, experimental, and EOR are not included. Now, they're a small share of overall oil sands production, but they're generally not thermal related or mining related types of production. They're just included in the oil sands region. That's not included. When you tabulate these things up, which can be quite complicated because you have to think about their power use, their boilers, the whole thing, it's about 13 to 14 megatons less than the direct definition used by National Inventory Reports. So I think they have about 80, 82 megatons, I'm going off memory, in 2018, whereas we would estimate the emissions subject to the 100 megaton cap at 66 megatons.
Yeah, that's very interesting because I mean, I report on this all the time and wasn't aware of that. So I can understand why regular readers would be a little confused.
It is confusing. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thanks for clearing that up. Kevin, thank you very much for this. Really appreciate it. And always enjoy talking emissions intensity with you. And oh, I do have one question for you, and that is absolute emissions. Do you have an idea of when we are going to see absolute emissions peak and begin to decline?
Well, we're doing another detailed projection similar to 2018, but we're focused on absolute emissions this fall. And so I hope to give you a more definitive answer there. But I think, we put out 2 releases, the timing was serendipitous, but not, we didn't line them up this way. So last week we put out a paper updating our long-term oil sands outlook that basically shows what we've shown in previous years. Our outlook is for a decelerated pace of growth. So a slowing growth profile of the oil sands. Coupled with this paper that shows ongoing intensity improvements year after year, eventually these things will collide in the sense that if you continue to chip away at the intensity basis and growth is slowing, the promise is that eventually that intensity, particularly if the industry can accelerate those reductions, will eventually pull down the absolute curve. And in this debate, there's difference of opinion about which is the most important metric. For transition and meeting reduction of global emissions, absolute emissions are the most important metric here. But intensity shows us the rate of change and helps us understand where and how opportunities to decarbonize are occurring and the relative competitiveness of different assets in the world as well. And hopefully allows you to predict those future emissions more accurately on an absolute side.
Right, but can you give us an idea roughly when you expect absolute emissions to peak?
I think you'll have to wait for the study, Markham. I don't want to preempt the research. I'm a data analytics guy. I've certainly done some back of the envelope estimates based on our projections, but I'd like to leave that for our larger study. We're going to delve into a little bit more detail. We're also going to go a little bit further out in that study as well to try to get a sense of what that arc could look like. I did want to just note one thing. I didn't answer one of your questions, and it wasn't intentional. It slipped my mind. What's the drivers you asked about earlier? The big drivers of the most recent emission reduction is really dominated by mining improvements, both improvements in the legacy mine facilities with upgraders continuing to demonstrate reductions, but also the ramp up of more efficient mining operations such as Fort Hills. And I should note Curl as well is in the same intensity. Greater volume from these facilities are helping to pull down the average. On the mining side, the reductions were quite material, 10% year-on-year reduction for mining operations. And again, we're doing averages, and you'll see in the study I make fun of myself for talking about averages. We really need to talk about facilities because the averages aren't going to represent anyone's operation, but still, it's still a significant reduction. It's probably worth noting.
There's nothing like an economist making fun of himself. I look forward to reading that. And we'll wait with bated breath for your study this fall. Thank you very much, Kevin. Always appreciate it.
Thanks, Markham. Take care.